everybody. Welcome back to Beyond Recovery. My name is Matt, and my guest today is Alex, former party girl turned sober yoga girl, founder of the Mindful Life Practice and host of the Sober Yoga Girl podcast, a show that I just so happened to be the guest on yesterday. So Alex, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So, as we were saying, just kind of as we were getting ready to start here today, man, I'm just so impressed and inspired by everything that you have going on with the mindful life practice, and of course your podcast, and just the way that you've got everything going on. You truly are, I imagine living the life that you always dreamed. Like you're traveling abroad, and you got so much other stuff going on. So I would love to start with that. As far as usually we kind of do the reverse and walk our way towards somebody's like what they're doing with the branding and such, but just so intrigued by everything you got going on. So I would love to start with that. Can you tell us about, the Mindful Life Practice and the podcast and everything else you have going on, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the founder of a sober yoga community called the Mindful Life Practice, and we have Zoom yoga classes and sober circles pretty much every day of the week, at all hours of the day. And we have leaders all over the world. And we have some initial sobriety programs. So I actually developed a 30 and 60-day sober girls yoga challenge. The idea being that you're basically replacing your habit of drinking with your habit of yoga. And we're kind of infusing this like women's only spirituality space for it's like an alternative form of recovery. And we actually now have a year-long program that is it's like about to be launched in a couple of days with another one of my teachers, which is really exciting. So we're like expanding that program. And I also do yoga teacher trainings and yoga retreats. I do yoga retreats around the world. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how long did it take you? Like, when did you start this journey, and what did it start with? Was it sort of the sobriety program, the 30-day, and it's just sort of expanded? Like, I'm just curious as to how this all started.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I became sober in around the same time as you, April of 2019. And it was shortly after that I met this psychic who basically told me my future, which is that I'm going to have this like alternative yoga retreat center, basically. And so the Mindful Life Practice began. I kind of got everything set up, got the business license, domain name, all of that stuff. And then I actually became a certified life coach, and I was really resistant to the idea of a niche being in sobriety. And I think we kind of had this conversation yesterday where you said like the niche almost found you, like in sobriety. And that's how I feel about it with me. So I actually was just teaching general yoga, and I was about 1 year sober. I didn't want to be a sober specific coach. And then it just kept coming to me, like, because I had engaged so much in sober communities online that people were just drawn to me for sobriety support when I didn't really realize that was like my gift to offer. And so I launched my first sober girls yoga program. Originally, it was just like an 8-week women's circle once a week. And then that kind of snowballed into the 30-day challenge, the 60-day challenge, now the year-long challenge. And then the podcast, it all just kind of, as soon as I stepped into my purpose, it all just like fell into place.
I'm interested with this psychic. First of all, where is this psychic located? I want to know my future. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's super cool. Obviously the psychic paints in broad strokes, I imagine. So didn't have and your niche is going to happen. It just happens to be sobriety. So that didn't come up. That is super cool though. And my question that came out of that is, why were you, maybe not reluctant is the right word, but what was it about the hesitancy about the niche of sobriety initially?
So I think I didn't want it to be my thing. Like, I think, my thing for a long time was yoga. And when I first shared my sobriety, I mean, first of all, I was hesitant in general to share my sobriety. So the only reason I ended up doing that was because I kind of got this really big following in the sobriety program that I used to quit. It was an online challenge-based program, and I was sharing in their Facebook group, and I got this really big following within the group. And so they reached out to me when I was 60 days sober and asked me to do a testimonial. And the testimonials were basically what got me into sobriety in the first place. So I was getting all these targeted Instagram, Facebook ads of all these inspiring people. And I knew that my story could like really touch and inspire people. but I also didn't want it to like ruin my reputation because I was a teacher at this point in the Middle East. And I was like, this just doesn't look good, like for a grade one teacher to have this like drinking issue. And so I actually waited on it for 30 days. So they asked me on day 60. I waited until day 90. And then when I finally decided to do the testimonial, I was like, okay, I need to get control of this story. So I need to share it from my account first so that it becomes my story as opposed to gossip about me, you know?
Mm.
And so I shared it from my Facebook and then got so much engagement, like so much positivity, so much support. And it just kind of went from there, you know, like I started sharing little by little. But then when I did my life coaching certification, which was about a month later, I was still only like 120 days sober. So I almost think I didn't think it was like my expertise per se.
Mm.
But I do believe that people really connected with me. And especially since, you know, I was early days sobriety, I was 4 months, and that's so obtainable for someone who is in the early days. To look at someone who's like just 30 days, just 60 days, just 90 days sober, like that can be very inspiring. Whereas 3 years, 4 years down the line can be a little bit like daunting. Like, how did she ever get to that point where she was 3 years, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I resonated with people more than I thought I did, which is cool.
Right. Yeah, a couple of things that come up for that. For sure, like I know you're a certified life coach as well. And I find like coaching can be like that. Like it seems to be when you're just a few steps up the road from somebody and it's still fresh in your head that
Yeah.
you can be a very much of service to somebody. So I can see where that would resonate being that early on. And I find that myself I do have to put myself back in, the shoes of me recently sober because
Yeah.
it does feel like, you know, a lifetime ago in some senses, especially
Totally.
like you and I have the same or similar sober date. And it also included like a global pandemic in there, so that
Totally.
3 years just seems like this lifetime almost. So I could see where that, the ability to connect, potentially is a little bit detached or intimidating, or however it may be framed. So
Right.
yeah, interesting. So, well, let's roll back the clocks. You hinted a little bit at your story there. So you're a grade one teacher and, a little bit worried about, your behind the scenes, your life coming up, and being positioned. That was the other thing actually I was going to mention too, is it's curious that, people that have this, going through recovery want to keep it hush hush and are a little bit secretive
Yeah.
about it, thinking that they're going to be judged when in fact when it comes out, it's like the opposite. It's like, wow, everybody's so supportive about,
Mhm.
the courageous step. And it sounds like you had a similar experience, which is great. So, but yeah, let's roll back the clocks. Let's go back to, when you were, as you put it, a former party girl. Let's get into like your origins and your experience with alcohol.
Yeah, so I am from Toronto originally. I'm in Toronto right now, but I haven't lived here for my entire 20s. So when I was around 18 or 19, I was away at university and I was really massively struggling with my mental health. I was really into partying and I ended up getting finding my way to yoga, and I got really connected to yoga, really committed to my practice. That was like these are like my two tools in my toolbox were drinking and yoga. And so I ended up working at this yoga studio. I first cleaned the studio, then I worked their front desk. I ended up in this management role and I was teaching yoga there. So I graduated from my yoga teacher training and became a yoga teacher. And I kind of said to my family, like, this is what I want to do with my life. And they really wanted me to follow a more traditional path and get a traditional job because, that's what people do. And so I ended up finishing my teacher's college and they were like really encouraging me to get a teaching job. And so at this point in Canada, it was like very hard to get a teaching job in Ontario. There were way too many people coming out of the programs and there weren't enough positions available. And so they were really pitching to us at Queen's, where I went to school, that we should go overseas. And so it was towards the end of the year, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like put it out there and find these like international teaching jobs. And so I ended up getting a job in the Middle East. So I moved to Kuwait when I was 23, and that was a complete wild experience because Kuwait is this tiny country that is in between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and alcohol is completely illegal, very conservative. And I end up getting into this. Well, first of all, everyone, when they hear I'm moving there, is like, alcohol is illegal there. I'm like, "I'll be fine. You can find it. You can make it." And it became this like very strange experience of me trying to get alcohol and learning how to make it and like networking with people who can give it to me because it's you can find it within Kuwait. It's just not as easy to find. Like obviously there's just like no liquor shops, but people have it and you can find it. You just need to know the right people. And so I sort of get this like obsessive mentality around alcohol and I'm drinking and partying and I end up having this pretty kind of traumatic experience in Kuwait with like it was just like a highly stressful place to live and there was a whole bunch of stuff going on with the place where I was working and the people I was surrounded with and ended up getting into this relationship and like things ended really terribly in my time in Kuwait and I ended up having a pretty big mental health breakdown. And I came back to Canada, got some treatment, started recovering, went to Bali, did this yoga teacher training. In Bali, I'm like, okay, this is it. I have to move here, but I don't know how. And I'm still following this thing of like, I need a job. So I ended up getting a job back in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi, which is like an hour outside of Dubai. And that was wild because it was like party central. Like it's totally normal in Dubai to drink on a weekend at like noon. It's normal to drink every night of the week. And so it kind of was just kind of like this out of control few years of my life where it was totally normal. Like it was like everyone was behaving like they were at an all-inclusive hotel like all the time. And I honestly didn't even last in Dubai more than I think a year and a half before I had to quit drinking. Like it just went so quickly. And I do often say, like, I honestly believe had I not experienced these extreme situations of like being in this conservative alcohol-free country to then being in this place that's like party central, I don't know if I would have gotten sober so young. I think these extremes really, really pushed me to this like bottom that I would have ended up in eventually. I just don't know if I would have gotten there at like age 27, you know, like I think it might have been like age 35 or something. But yeah, so here I am being like, I have to quit drinking. And that was like kind of the short form version of like me getting to that point of choosing sobriety.
Yeah, it's quite the story. I love the yeah, that idea of like the contrasting. And yeah, I'm even just picturing how it was in Kuwait, like how like drugs can be around here, like hey, like do you know
Yeah,
somebody that can, and it's
100%.
which is so odd because like in Canada, I imagine it's like that in Ontario. Definitely in Alberta, there's like a liquor store seemingly every block, in some, so it's just so readily available until, 2 a.m. and this
Hmm.
this kind of thing. So to go somewhere else where it's like kind of like, hey, do you know where to, do like that sort of thing is such a, and then like to your point, yeah, it just expedited your recovery, your sobriety, or, to your rock bottom essentially for you to be able to come back from that. So one thing that you mentioned, the way that you worded it was interesting. I'd like to circle back to is like you said, I followed the I need to get a job thing.
Yeah.
What was it like for you in those early days? Like, was there a sense of urgency? Because I think a lot of people can relate to that as far as, just the money energy. I know we talked about it on your show a little bit. What was it like for you in those early days of like entrepreneurship or, even like doing the yoga thing where you got on one hand, your parents are kind of wanting you into that,
Hmm.
they have this expectation of you to do this quote unquote normal job. And you're having this idea that you're going to do, this entrepreneurship thing. So what kind of pressure did that create for you and how did you navigate it?
It was really, really hard. And I do think this was also one of the reasons that I was drinking so much was because I knew from this age of like 23 that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And yet I also felt trapped in like the way everyone else move through their careers in terms of like you get a job and then you just like do it until you retire. And so me having this dream of being a yoga teacher was constantly met with people thinking that I wouldn't be able to make enough money, which I think is so funny because I make more money running my business than I did as a teacher.
Right.
And people all the time kept saying like it's not stable, it's not secure. And so you have these ideas of like you're not going to be making enough money to survive. And it's so funny because I pivoted into it and it was really, really scary at the beginning, like just not knowing if the money was going to come through. And this was like the biggest thing I had to let go of is like there's a security in having a stable paycheck and knowing that every single month that money is going to come in and that's going to provide for you. And so there's a bit of instability in like, I don't know when I'm going to get a new sign up. I don't know when I'm going to get a new member. I don't know when someone's going to cancel or drop out of like one of my programs. I don't know how many people are going to sign up for my retreats, but it's like this letting go of controlling that and just trusting that because this is my purpose and because this is my path, I will get everything I need. And it has always worked out, even in moments where I'm like, I don't know what is going to happen next. Like there's been a few really scary moments, but it has always worked out for me. And like, so I quit my job a year ago and it's been completely fine.
I love that. That is the most challenging thing I think for a lot of people is it's such a common thread with a lot of people as far as like hearing the why you shouldn't. People are giving you their risk assessments of what you're attempting to
Mm-hmm.
do, and under the guise that they care for you and they want to make sure that you're making the right decision and you don't fail. But in the meantime, that is, I imagine, I'm not sure how it was for you, but like those voices that show up in your head
Yeah.
when there's those, when you're in that, you're still in that gap between like survival mentality and being able to let go and, skill
Yeah.
acquisition and everything that occurs in the middle there, right? So I noticed on
I
your
mean,
website you do have something about like letting go. Like how important is that, and is that show up in some of your teachings as well? Is that part of recovery? I'm just kind of curious the theme of it. I just remembered looking on your website and seeing those
yeah.
specific words.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's been I think it's one of the biggest challenges that all of us have to make in terms of like, you're obviously letting go of your relationship with alcohol. And then I was looking at something, a quote the other day from my podcast, that one of my managers put it up on the Instagram, and the person had said, I can't remember who said, I was like, did I say that or someone else say it? But it was that you get to a point in your sobriety when usually there's something about your life that you don't like. And that's the reason behind all of your drinking. And I was looking at that and I
Mm.
was like, that's so true, is that when I work with people in coaching or in these programs, it's more often than not really about alcohol. Like the alcohol
Uh,
cravings are the one thing, the addiction is the one thing, the dynamic with alcohol is the one thing, but there's usually something else happening in like your family, your marriage, your job. Like for me, it was like, I don't want to do this job anymore, but like I'm like stuck in it.
mm.
And I don't want to live like when I was in Kuwait, I was like, I don't want to live in this country right now, but I'm stuck in it and I don't know how to make this change. And I feel that there's a big letting go process that you have to make, or else you might just end up getting back where you started. And so I think it's like this constant ongoing thing. And it's a big theme of the yoga philosophy and the yoga sutras that I teach through my work.
Very cool. Very cool. When was there a shift for you? Or was it gradual, or was it like kind of hitting a light switch as far as getting out of, you know, uh, survival mentality into like a service mentality where you're not necessarily worrying about surviving anymore? And was it dependent on, like monetary, or was it literally a matter of just getting into the mindset, just let it go, don't be focusing on survival. Be focusing on what you're doing. The service aspect of it. Just curious how that was for you.
That's a great question. I think I back and forth through it all the time.
Mm,
For me, it's
yeah.
like a bunch of I do a lot of manifestation work, a lot of like mantras. And then you're totally right about that in terms of like if I just focus on the service and focus on serving people and connecting with people and making sure I'm busy in terms of like podcast interviews and calls and everything, that it should always be the area of focus, is like impacting people as opposed to what income is coming through as a result of that.
Mm,
And I find that the money always comes when I'm just serving, exactly as you said.
cool. Okay, really good insight there. When you're talking about like making sure that you stay busy, like you're booking podcasts, obviously you have a lot on the go
Yeah.
here. What is it like to find the balance between that? Because I know it's got to be a big part of
Hmm.
your life, I imagine, with the meditation, and we did talk about this on your show as well yesterday. So the time for mantras, the time for what does that look like as far as the balance in your life? Is that scheduled? Is that like just a
Hmm.
daily practice? What does that look like for you?
That's a great question. So I find that I do best when I'm in a community and doing practices as a group. I found that in order for me to stay accountable, that works best for me, and that always has. And that's why I was drawn to like the yoga studio environment And so I lead classes all the time on my Zoom platform, but I also need to step away from that and have a yoga practice that is just for me. And so when I'm back in Bali, I actually have built into my calendar, like I've gone through and scheduled in that I make sure I do my own 90-minute yoga practice per day. And that's like a non-negotiable. And usually if I get that done, everything else is fine. Like I have time for myself to stop and have lunch. I've now just scheduled in like different other administrative things. Like this is my hour where I do communications, and this is my 4-hour block every week where I look at the paperwork, and this is my 4-hour block where I do this. And if I have it all kind of mapped into a schedule, then it becomes like a lot less overwhelming. But yeah, the non-negotiable of that 90-minute yoga practice for me as a student every single day. And that is what usually gets me going for a really positive day myself.
Beautiful. And as far as that 90-minute window, is that flexible as far as could be morning, could be afternoon, could be evening, or is it morning practice?
Well, I have really odd hours because I live in Bali, which is 12 hours ahead of Eastern Standard, which is where 60% of my clients are.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I work at really weird times. Like I teach my classes sometimes at 8 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. because it's morning for the Eastern Standard people.
Right.
But the really cool thing about that is that I end up I usually start work every single day. Like I get up at 6 and I'm working from like 6:30 a.m. until 10 a.m., which is 6:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. for the Eastern Standard people. And then everyone goes to bed in Toronto. And then I have like usually 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to myself, which is amazing.
Oh,
so
okay.
in that time, I'll book I also do personal training. So I'll book in like my yoga, my PT, my own lunch, my own admin. I love it because no one bothers me. And then I usually get back on at like between 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So I have like a really weird schedule, but it's really
Yeah.
beautiful for me because it means that I have this really wonderful chunk of time where I'm typically undisturbed.
Yeah.
So it's good.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. You really use the time, the otherwise sort of unusual time frame compared to what I'm used to, for example. You really use it to your advantage, it sounds like. So that's really
Yeah.
cool. How long did it take you to figure that out as far as with your scheduling? Because that's one thing that I'm, in early entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
and finding I'm constantly dealing, like tweaking and changing and trying different
Yeah.
things on the scheduling just to make it work so I don't burn out, and so I'm still enjoying what I'm doing and all that. How long did it take you to sort of tweak that to your advantage to the point where it's just like everything flows?
It took me a while. Obviously, I had a little change in that. So, well, first of all, when I first started the business, it was so intense because I was still a teacher. So I was working from
Mm,
like 7:45 until 3, and then I was running the business from basically 3 p.m. until like 10 p.m. from Dubai. And so that was wild. And then
yeah.
I quit my job and then I was doing it full time. And I was working so much. I was trying to hit every time zone. I was trying to do all these things. And then also I didn't feel like, I don't know what it was. Like maybe it was living in the UAE. Maybe it was like this intense hustle I had done for like for 6 years in the Middle East. I could not get out of this like hustle mindset. And so there was like no free time or no joy. There was no personal yoga for me. And when I moved to Bali in October, even then it was like a reschedule. I didn't feel settled. I didn't have my home. Like I wouldn't say until January of this year did I really get into a rhythm with it. So that was
Mm.
probably almost 2 years into running the business. It was about 6 months into quitting my job. And so it just took me a long time of like trying things out and figuring things out until I like really connected into it.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And I imagine you use like the sort of intuitive energy to find that as opposed to just
Mhm.
trying to force things into a time slot, right? I could see where that would be could potentially be challenging. Just a couple of quick questions have come up about your story that I wouldn't mind
Yeah.
popping on you there. When in your timeline did you see the psychic? Was the psychic right before you quit your job, or was that far earlier than that? I'm just kind of curious as far as the timeline went was with that.
That's a that's a great question. So the story with the psychic is that I taught grade 1. So I had an assistant teacher in my classroom for the whole 4 years that I was in the UAE. And so I got this woman, and it was really cool that she was my assistant teacher because these people come into your life for like a reason, and I think we were both on the exact same journey that we found each other of like finding spirituality. So she had connected with this psychic, and she was telling me for years, because she would just hear me complaining, being like, I hate my job, I hate teaching, blah blah blah, and she's like, you should see my psychic. And I just had no time for it. Like I was like, I am not wasting, like, it was like, I think it was $100, $100 for a session. I'm like, I'm not wasting my money on that. Like that's stupid. And then it was when I got sober, and I was, so you go through the withdrawal, and then you're in the pink clouds, and then you settle into like, is this all there is? And she said, you should see my psychic. And at this point, I'm like, well, I have no direction and I have nothing holding me back. I'm no longer like spending all this money on partying. So I'm gonna just do it. So I was around 30 days sober, and I drove from Abu Dhabi to Dubai. So it was like an hour and a half, showed up at his house, walked in the door. He's like, close your eyes, count back from 21 to 1. Open them, open my eyes. And he says, you were never meant to be a teacher. You were meant to be a healer. And I just started sobbing, and I sobbed for the entire hour. And he just talked, and he just told me so many things. And he didn't ask me like why I was crying or anything. And I just cried so hard, because I was like, I wanted this for so long. And what it was is he was telling me like, this is going to happen. So it's not like he gave me any ideas that I didn't already have.
Yeah.
He was like, this is what you're going to be doing. He's like, around age 30, you're not going to be a teacher anymore, but he's like, you have to, do the work and put in the work and build the business. And I think that is where the break really is that a lot of my friends have seen him and had amazing experiences, but people have the same thing that I did, which was, so shortly down the road, about 6 months later, maybe 3 months later, I went to see him again. And I wasn't actually doing the things that he told me to. Like I did my life coach training, I did my yoga training, I did all this stuff, but I was in a relationship with someone who he said, you should not be in a relationship with that person. And I was really focusing on, this person had a business in fitness, and I was really focusing on creating my retreats within his business and creating my whatever within his business, which would never propel me to where I am today. Right. And so things were not going to plan. And the psychic, he kind of blamed it on me. He said like, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then I was pissed off. And then I was like, I'm never seeing that guy again. And I think that's where the break is that people have. People think that the psychic is just going to say, you're going to run retreats. And then you're like, well, that didn't happen. But okay, well, that didn't happen if you're like still doing your teaching job, right? Like, and so you can't expect him to like hand the future to you. He's going to give this vision to you. And then like, you have to do the work to make it happen. And that's the case with everything in life. You think that a psychiatrist is going to like give you mental health, or you think like your AA sponsor or your sober coach is going to like give you sobriety, but like they're going to support you and they're going to give you these like breadcrumbs, but like you have to pick up the breadcrumbs. Like you have to actually put in the work to get to that point. And I think it took me almost a year to understand that, honestly, because I saw the psychic in 2019. We had this big kind of fallout where I was pissed at him because nothing was happening. And then what actually ended up happening is that in April of 2020 or March of 2020, pandemic hit. I get fired from my yoga job, break up with this boyfriend in lockdown, teaching online. This like whole window opens up in my life where I'm no longer like wasting my time on the wrong things. And then the mindful life practice came together within like minutes. As soon as all of that happened, it was like a month later, I spoke to the psychic again, and he was like shocked that the company had propelled to that quick after, a whole year of like kind of nothing happening. And it totally speaks to how, as soon as you clear the space from all the stuff that basically every single thing in your life, you have to say, is this actually getting me towards my future? Or is this just like I would be tutoring kids and thinking like, oh, this is going to help me like save money, but like tutoring a kid is not going to help me build my yoga retreat business. Right. And so I was just filling my time with all these random things that weren't actually working towards the goal.
That's great advice. Yeah. And what a story. I'm glad that we delved back into it. So that's so epic. Like everything about it is so cool. And it's like, I want to get in, because you mentioned like mantras and such. So it's like, that's the one thing is like, if you ever watch the movie version of the Law of Attraction, it gives us the impression you can just sit on your couch and envision yourself in like a Lamborghini, and not mentioning the fact that you still have to do the work. You got to meet the universe more than halfway, right? It has this idea for you, but it's like with anything, you have to earn it, and with like consistency and showing up and doing your part, right? And that's often overlooked,
Yeah.
as far as I love what you're saying though. Is like, and I can really relate to this because I'm just going through this stage now where I'm looking at all the periphery of my old life that I had, where I'd have all these extra things that brought me joy and all that. But moving forward with it, it
Yeah.
still remains on the periphery from what I'm trying to do with my own business. And now I'm finding that it's actually taking away from what I'm trying to do. And I need my energy centered and moving forward. So slowly integrating them in a different way. Like if there's a music project that I have, I'm like, hey guys, how about sound therapy for our next album, and then bringing everything in. And that's what I think you do so wonderfully is like everything you have going on, you've like brought it together and it's all moving in the one direction as opposed to, as you mentioned, this like periphery of like, well, this is kind of helping me, but in reality it's just taking some of your energy. So really
Yeah, totally.
great insight on that. But the mantras though, so is the mantras, I love this kind of stuff. What is some of just like recommendations for somebody if they're putting in mantras, like if they're writing something out, what are some just like quick little tips? Because there's definitely a proper way to do it. I've found.
Yeah. Well, what I have personally found works with me is people are going to, so I'll give you an example. On one of my advanced yoga teacher trainings, my yoga teacher had us doing this Sanskrit mantra that just did not resonate with me at all. We were repeating it. I think we were repeating it like 100 times for like a morning type of thing. And I was like, this is not really getting me anywhere. And I ended up coming up with my own thing. And while everyone else was doing, what the group was doing, I was just doing my own thing. I didn't tell the teacher because I knew he probably wouldn't like that. But what I mean by that is that you need to pick something that actually is going to like resonate with you and move you towards your goals and your dream. And I know that there are tons of like beautiful Sanskrit chants and mantras that you can like chant as a group and do as a group, which I do engage with. But when it comes to me working on my own mindset, I am usually personally writing something out that is like resonating with where I want to be and where I want to get in the journey. And so I teach like a financial on the topic of like money. I started running money manifestation classes once a week. And it's like this fusion of like, we meditate, we do yoga, and then we do a bit of journaling. It's really cool. And I have some mantras that I give people, but I say like, if these ones are not sticking with you, pick something else that works for you. Cause maybe you have some other goal that like repeating it over and over in your head would work better. And the keys of coming up with something are like, keep it in the positive and keep it short, and
Yeah.
find a way that it works for you. Like I had some women in a group earlier this week talking about making musical, like putting their mantras to a tune and singing them, 4 times throughout the day. I thought that was beautiful. So just finding a practice that is going to help propel you to where you want to be.
Yeah, no, great advice. I love it. I love putting it to music too. That's such a cool way to yeah,
Yeah,
to get it in your body and get it feeling like changes the energy of it too, right? So super cool.
totally.
I think like you mentioned too, like when you're, and I know it's a big part of yoga and and even martial arts and things like this. It's like that having like a lifelong learner, or like a student mentality, because you mentioned you're like you that's how you approach it with your 90 minutes a day, is like have this, it's almost like the white belt mentality or the
Mhm.
student mentality. How important is that to bring to the table? And is that something that you can kind of transfer that mentality over to recovery or sobriety, as far as just keeping it, within arm's reach, as opposed to like, okay, it's in the past now and I don't have to worry about that? Is there any overlap between that?
100%. Yeah, I think the practice is really important to me because it is this hour of my day where I feel like I get really grounded and really centered, and it changes the way I approach and navigate everything that comes up throughout the day. And I would say it's almost, so when I got to like 1,000 days sober, I had this thing that I shared, which is like the further I get from my sobriety, the closer I must stay to it. And I
Mm,
feel like the further I got along, the further away I got from everything. And the relevance of me keeping sobriety at the forefront by doing podcasts, by hosting meetings, by running challenges is that I'm like staying connected to the reasons why I've chosen this life. And I think the further you get away from that, like withdrawal, the further you get away from realizing how important it is to be alcohol free, right? Because the reality is I wouldn't have this life if I weren't sober. And so if I stay in. So I try to keep myself really involved by like staying connected, going to meetings, showing up. And like that would be what I would encourage for everyone. Like I know I never did AA, I never did the 12 steps myself, but I know they encourage like 90 meetings in 90 days. And then they encourage the path of service after. So being involved and giving service to like stay committed and stay to your community. And that's actually something that we're bringing into. So we're coming up with a Sober Girls Yoga Challenge, full year recovery program. So we start with the challenge and it's going to go on for a full year. And one of the things we're incorporating is like service that's going to help people stay committed by giving back and mentoring someone who's in their early days of sobriety. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes I see with people. Like the biggest mistakes with yoga is people stop practicing. And the biggest mistake with sobriety is that people stop going to whatever their thing is, whether it's meetings or sober yoga or staying connected, whatever your thing is that's helping you keep sober, you should stick with it no matter how far along the way you go.
Sweet. Oh yeah, great answer. Great answer. I love it. That's great. Interested about some of these retreats that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So obviously this, and we'll have it in the show notes, your website and everything going on. What's like the whole psychology and framework behind picking a location for a retreat, or are they basically based out of like around where you're living, or how do those come about?
That's a great question. So for me, I started on retreats based on places where I've been that have been meaningful to me. So
Cool.
I ran retreats in the UAE. I still do that whenever I'm back there. But I also have brought people to Bali this past year because that was like a place of transformation for me, obviously, and it's where I live. And I also brought people to Mexico, and that was where I did my first yoga teacher training in way back in 2014. And so Bali and Mexico will be constants. They'll probably be annual retreats. And I did a ton of traveling over my time living in the Middle East. And so I'm actually going back to places that I really loved and connecting with people I met there and kind of building programs from there. So we're looking at some locations in mind are India and Morocco and Costa Rica. And so those are kind of in the back burner right now.
Yeah, unreal. That's just wonderful. Um, yeah, how is your business change? I imagine it's quite the hybrid of, like you mentioned, there's the Zoom calls for folks that are back in Canada or wherever they may be in the more the North America time zones, as you mentioned, and and you got everything going on in your current home city and country. But you say you have in-person retreats. What would you say is like percentage wise as far as like in the digital realm versus in person as far as your business model these days?
So I would say the big focus is our Zoom community.
Mm,
And then the in-person stuff usually comes out of that. So people are
gotcha.
usually members of the Zoom community ongoing. And then the
Yes.
retreat is like a gathering of all the people from Zoom, basically. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there are some random people who just jump on for a retreat, which is super cool. And it's their first engagement with the community. But more often than not, they will end up engaging with the community after. Like someone on my Bali retreat has just signed up for one of my teacher training programs next week. And last
Mm,
night there were a couple women from Mexico on the sober meeting that I hosted. So I find that people who join the retreats often join the Zoom community. It's kind of like ongoing support all throughout the year, wherever you
yeah.
are.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a cool model. And then it's like something to look forward to too. It's like
Yeah,
like a huge enhancement or celebration or milestone, right? You've
totally.
done like say for example like 6 months or a year sober. It's like boom, I got this on the calendar, retreat, see everybody in person, such a different energy. So yeah, I love it. That's super cool. Well, one last question for you, as we wind things down here. Was there anything that led you to having that sobriety date that you had? Was there anything that was just like your final straw, or was it more of a gradual process where you're just like, you know what, now is the time, and then you like, because I know it's not at the beginning of the month. What was it that was like your linchpin moment where like, okay, done deal? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was actually in Morocco around the time when I was quitting. So I had spring break as a teacher and I was traveling around Morocco with my mom. And I had kind of had this long period building up of me sort of Googling like how to quit drinking. Am I an alcoholic? I started getting these targeted ads for this recovery community. And the thing was that every single thing in that year leading up to this point felt like it was like not the time to quit drinking. Like you have all these excuses, but I was like, I'm in Southeast Asia. Being sober would like ruin this backpacking trip. And then like, I was going on a trip with my friends to Norway. I'm like, this would ruin this. And then my friend was visiting and then Morocco. So I was like, okay, this is just like not the time to quit. And so it was kind of in my mind of trying to take a break after this trip, after I get all the stuff out of the way. And then what really kind of hit the nail in the coffin per se was I was traveling around Morocco, and I just realized that like so much of the trip was depending on when I could drink. So in these Middle Eastern countries, there's a lot of places where you can't find booze because there's like, Muslim communities or parts of the country where there just aren't alcohol shops. And so the whole trip became around like planning to have our booze in our backpacks so that we could drink wherever we were and traveling around. And so it was my 27th birthday and we were on the high Atlas Mountains. We had hiked all the way up with one wine bottle. And I was just like so pissed off that I couldn't get drunk, like we finished the wine and then that was it. And I think I'd said to my mom, like, don't share this with anyone. It's my birthday. And that was the moment when I was going to bed that I was like, you know what? I really need to just take a break because this is kind of ruining. I was like, had the awareness of like, this is ruining my vacation. But there were 3 more days of the trip or 4 more days or wherever it was. And I could not quit then. So I like went out with this bang of like drink. And then it was actually the plane ride from Casablanca to Abu Dhabi that I just said, you know what, this is it. And I originally it was 30 days sober. And then, here I am 3 and a bit years later. So
Awesome.
That would be my one advice to anyone is that if quitting drinking altogether feels daunting, just do a chunk. Just say, I'm going to take a month off of drinking and see what happens. Because for me, it was enough to be like, wow, I'm done. But I don't think I ever would have quit if it was like, I'm quitting forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think the month was really, really helpful for me. And that's what I would encourage to anyone is just take it little by little, day by day, week by week, whatever seems attainable at first. And you might find that you have such a positive shift that you're like, this is the new path.
Love it. Great advice. And you're here to help them with that too. You have your 30-day challenge, you got your 60-day challenge, all the different challenges you have. So where can somebody reach out to you? Where are you frequent on Instagram or is it through your website? Where can we find you online?
Yeah, I would recommend Instagram. I'm on it all the time. So Instagram, Alex McRobes, or Sober Yoga Girl Podcast, or the Mindful Life Practice. You can find me at all 3, and happy to connect and have a little coffee call and just kind of see how I can help you.
Rad. Love it. I really enjoyed this conversation today. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome.
And I enjoyed our show swap as well. So yes, and we'll definitely keep in touch. We lots to talk about in the future as well. So Alex, thank you so much for coming on today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt.
Bye-bye.